Hello and welcome to TYT Community. We have a great show tonight, and we have a great guest tonight joining us to talk about the Keystone XL pipeline. So I want to welcome Desi Doyen from the Green News Report. Say hi, Desi.
Hi.
It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
We also have, of course, my lovely co-host, Rhiannon and Avaneen.
Hi.
And, of course, great friend of the show, Daniel Aviles.
Hi.
And like I said, I want to start out with a little bit of news on Keystone XL pipeline. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Keystone XL pipeline is a project that is aimed to move oil from the Alberta tar sands to an existing Keystone pipe located in Steel City, Nebraska. Now, of course, the Keystone XL pipeline is actually 327 miles of new pipeline. And of course, this is a very controversial pipeline because it goes over the Ogallala Aquifer. I'm not sure if I said that right. But
Ogallala Aquifer.
thank you, Desi.
Ogallala.
And of course, there's some environmental impact from the burning the tar sands. A State Department study actually said just refining the tar sands would add 17% more emissions over standard oil. So obviously that's a huge jump in emissions just for turning it into something that we can use. Environmental groups also state that pipes carrying the tar sands oil are more likely to and actually have ruptured more often, as evidenced by some of the recent spills in Arkansas, Yellowstone River, the Kalamazoo River, and in Texas. Now, of course, cleaning up tar sands is incredibly difficult using conventional means because tar sands is more dense than regular oil, and it sinks to the bottom sediment of the river. According to TransCanada, they have some publicly released safety reports that said that the original Keystone pipeline had over 12 spills in its first year of operation. And it ranges from 5 gallons in Freeman, South Dakota, to 500 barrels, or 21,000 gallons of oil that was spilled in Brampton, North Dakota. Now, of course, TransCanada will say that their new pipelines are going to be safer, but it's really important to state that the Kalamazoo River is still not clean, even after several years of cleanup attempts. And it's also important to note that a 1980 law classifies tar sands oil not as oil. It's diluted bitumen. So it's actually not considered to be oil, and that's very important because this law states that Exxon does not have to pay into a oil spill cleanup fund. And finally, TransCanada also states that the Keystone XL pipeline will create thousands of new jobs. But a State Department study shows that it will only create 35 permanent jobs. The National Resources Defense Council that says that Keystone will not lower gas prices as promised. And since the oil will be shipped out on the international market, the argument that many proponents of the Keystone XL pipeline use is that it will create energy independence here in America. Well, that blows that whole argument apart. Yet when polled, over 2/3 of Americans still support the Keystone XL pipeline. And so I want to go to my panel and kind of ask the question of why do you think that is? And we'll start with you, Desi. Why do you think that Americans are still in support of Keystone XL pipeline despite all of these environmental disasters that have been happening recently and all the lies from big oil?
I think that it's because they don't know about all of those aspects that you just mentioned. I don't think that they understand. Most Americans, are really busy. They have lives, they have jobs, they have kids, they have parents, they have all kinds of stuff that they're trying to do, and they're really too busy to get the sort of details that, you and I, as sort of news junkies and people who actually really care about investigating this stuff, instead of doing fantasy football, we are looking at the Keystone XL pipeline. So one of the issues that you mentioned is that I think most people don't understand that it's this really sticky tar sands, diluted bitumen that you mentioned, and they don't understand that it's different from regular oil. They don't even know about the Kalamazoo River spill that was a tar sand spill. That it's been 2 years and almost $1 billion, not quite $1 billion, but $700 million or more later, that it hasn't been cleaned up, and they don't understand because they don't know. And so that's why it's good for us to talk about this, and to, especially if you're someone who does understand these facts, to share them with people you know. Person to person is how we get this information out, so that people can see what it is that we're talking about. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't know about we know that diluted bitumen is extremely tarry and heavy, and it has to have all these chemicals added to it to help it pass through the pipeline, because otherwise it's stickier than fudge at this point. I'm trying to think what it's like rubber cement, even worse than that. So they don't understand that those chemicals, when there's a pipeline burst, those chemicals that are used to make it diluted actually then evaporate into the air almost immediately upon exposure. So that's why you hear about the little kids in Arkansas in the elementary school near the pipeline burst in Mayflower. There were 8 kids that started vomiting because they think, they were ultra sensitive to all the chemicals that are in the tar sands that just immediately entered the atmosphere and created this sort of, nauseous cloud that hurt those kids. So that's the reason why I think it is. I think people just don't know, and they haven't heard. Failure of media.
Yeah, I was just going to actually say the failure of media is a really good point. But I want to throw it to Reed. Reed, what are your thoughts on this?
Thank you. Yes, I agree with Desi wholeheartedly that we have to think that as news junkies, as she put it, as people who do our own research and put in a real effort to stay well informed, we kind of live in our little bubbles sometimes, and we have to realize that most people just aren't going to, either can't or won't, do the amount of research that we do. So all they get is what is mainstream, what shows up on their television in between their favorite shows at night, the propaganda telling us that the Keystone Pipeline is completely safe and that it's going to bring so many more jobs to the economy. Their own website, the Keystone.com website, claims that they're going to create 9,000 new permanent jobs, when the reality of it is that they're going to create at maximum 500 to 900 permanent new jobs, and that's it. They're going to have 5,000 to 6,000 workers in the couple of years it's going to take to build the Keystone Pipeline, but then they're all going to be laid off, and they're not going to have anything to fall back on. But people take that out of desperation. They think new jobs, I need new jobs. I've been living off of, unemployment for months now. I'm just desperate for a job. It doesn't matter what. If you can manage to get a job at an oil rig, then you're going to take that job if they offer you, $10, $15 an hour, even though it is risky. Like the main job source around here still is coal mining, and
Yes.
That seems archaic and backwards, but this little small town is their main job market is for coal mining. So you get what you got during the the 2012 election are signs saying fire Obama and the war on coal.
Which of course isn't true, but that coal, I don't know if you know this, but coal mining employment is actually up during the Obama administration over the last 2 years. But that's not the information that gets out to the people. All they see are the ads.
Exactly, yes, and especially in areas around here that are extremely poor, you get people who don't have access to the internet, who don't have time to find the information that they need to be well informed. So you have a mass of desperate, poor, ignorant people who just hear what they're told and assume that must be true. I talk to people all the time who hear some false information on Fox News or something, and when I talk to them and I tell them my views on the situation, they think that I'm out of my mind or something, because they're like, well, I heard on Fox News that it was like this, so what are you talking about? I never heard anything like that. So,
and then they call you an environmentalist hippie.
Right, yes, I'm the extremist and somehow trying to ruin their way of life.
And they also tell you that you're destroying the economy. Yeah, I hear you there. When you talk about people that don't have access to actual real media, because keep it real. Fox News isn't media. It's not news. Fox News isn't news.
It's a
And the
propaganda
Keystone
outlet mostly.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes. There should be laws against Fox News. There should be laws against lying to the public. And but the Keystone Pipeline would enable us.
But actually there aren't.
Right. The Keystone Pipeline would enable us to create 3 times more oil than we do now, basically concreting our dependence on oil rather than opening up doorways and windows for us to get out of oil production and into more sustainable forms of energy.
Well, here's the thing. We really don't need all that extra oil, to be honest with you, because what we're going to do, we're sending it to Texas. Why are we sending it to Texas? Because we're going to ship it out to the international oil markets.
Right. Not only do people think that they're going to get more jobs, they think that oil prices are going to go down and gas prices are going to go down. That's also what they've been fed.
That's right. Because I think they don't talk about the fact that right now there's a glut of oil at the terminal in Cushing, Oklahoma, and this will actually eliminate the glut by enabling them to go all the way and ship even more. And because right now, if you go to the Midwest, you'll find that in Oklahoma they have some of the lowest gas prices in the country. And that's because there's a glut there. The refiners are the only refiners, they're the ones that have the whole game right now. And once that connector is completed, then that glut is going to go away. And like you said, they can ship it out to China and to other countries, and that's going to raise the price of gas for all of us here in the United States. And of course, we'll get the pollution as well.
And the oil companies will get all of the profits. Now,
Right.
I want to throw it over to Daniel here, get his thoughts on this, because you've been a little quiet over there.
Well, first off, we have to remind the American public that we're still giving subsidies to these institutions,
True.
as if they still need it. Well, one of the reasons why that majority of America is environmentally uninformed is because they're indoctrinated at a young age to believe the current media that we have, which you have roughly 3 major outlets now, roughly about 3 major outlets. That people don't ask who's collecting money from these organizations. It's your entire Congress. It's everybody. And why in these particular areas, why do they not care if it's such an environmental threat? Why would they go and do it? Well, these people live in a freaking Manhattan skyline. They don't live where you and I live. They don't have to deal with the environmental ramifications.
No.
And no one wants to talk about the elephant in the room, the Koch brothers, which is going to take this oil and sell it overseas. I mean, there's people out there who still believe that we're collecting oil from Iraq. That why do we invade Iraq? Well, we invade Iraq. It's going to lower gas prices. No, that oil's going to the French.
Yep, it's going to China too. There was a big story out recently that said that most of the oil that was promised to the United States is actually being bought up by China, and because the Bush administration kind of screwed all that up as far as us getting all that oil.
And tar sands emit more carbon than other sources of oil, and
the process of extracting the tar sands is more emissions intensive than conventional oil, definitely.
That's 17% more than conventional oil.
Right. Yeah, and James Hansen, who's a leading climate scientist, said that if tar sands are thrown into the game, insofar as our oil production, that there is no going back. We're not going to be able to get back to a safe CO2 level, and that's going to be basically game over if the tar sands are allowed to be exploited.
So that leads me into my next question is, what do you guys think the environmental impact will be of Keystone XL if it's approved by the Obama administration? And I'm just going to throw this out to anybody.
Well, I would say that the environmental impact, you've got the local, regional, near-term, mid-term, and long-term. So local, I don't know if you guys have seen Avatar, but you've seen the mining and the mining equipment. That was in the movie Avatar. That is based on the Athabasca tar sands development in Alberta. James Cameron went there and saw that and said, oh, that's a great truck. Let's use that truck. Those gigantic trucks with the huge wheels that are bigger than a person standing on top. So that's based on that same concept. And so the local impacts, it uses a tremendous amount of water. They have to dispose of all this wastewater. They have tailings ponds where a couple of years ago 1,600 ducks made the stupid mistake, they didn't know, being ducks, not to land on that tailings pond, and they all died. That was a big problem. There are other studies that show locally that lakes and rivers that are within the region of the tar sands are showing higher chemical poisoning, contamination that is consistent with the kinds of chemicals that are being used in the tar sands in Alberta right now. And of course you have the transportation of that oil through those pipelines, which we've already shown. We've already talked about it's extra corrosive, so it corrodes those pipelines faster than conventional oil. It's harder to clean up with the issue of going over the Ogallala Aquifer. Yes, they rerouted it in Nebraska away from the really sensitive Sandhills region, which is where the water table is like a foot below the surface of the ground, so tar sands dripping into that would be incredibly impossible to clean up. They've rerouted it, but it still goes over the Ogallala Aquifer because that extends from Nebraska to Texas. So that's just the local immediate impacts. We've already seen in the Kalamazoo River spill and in Arkansas how incredibly difficult it is to clean up a spill. You can't just vacuum it up. You can't dredge it, because if you dredge it, you destroy the riverbed and you destroy whatever else is inside that's connected to that. And then you have the midterm and the long term. You've got the emissions issues that come along with that, and then especially long term. The James Hansen, who's now retired, he retired last week from NASA as a climate scientist, so he can devote himself full time to activism. He's also saying, and other climate scientists are saying, that if you calculate the amount of emissions that are estimated to be in the tar sands, if we do burn them all, they're trying to make a point that it's not necessarily the tar sands by themselves would be enough to tip us over. We just don't know what the tipping point would be for climate sensitivity. So that's why they're warning that if you build the infrastructure, you are committed to that infrastructure for the next 30 to 50 years. And that is what encourages the continuous use of these heavy emissions causing fuels that are actually putting us in the wrong direction rather than the direction we need to go in.
Excellent. That's an excellent answer on the long effects of the Keystone XL pipeline. And another question that I want to throw out to the panel is, do you think the Obama administration is going to approve this?
Most certainly.
I'm afraid so.
I also think that it will, that he will. I mean,
I fear as much as well. I think I get that same sense that with even though both the Obama administration, Obama himself, John Kerry, Secretary of State, have all come out and said how important it is to fight climate change, that I think that they are going to probably try to thread the needle and maybe give some environmental groups some sort of something over here and maybe something over there, and like a bargaining chip that they can then use for other things. I don't know. I don't see how he cannot approve it based on the words and deeds of the White House administration outside of what President Obama has said.
Yes, exactly. I would be pleasantly surprised if he didn't pass it.
Yeah.
Now, considering all the money in politics issue, which is a very important issue when it comes to reporting it, unlike TYT, I know Cenk does a lot of reporting on money in politics. Everything seems to be tied back to money in politics. So I just want to ask do you think that the lobbying and all the special interest money coming from groups like the Koch brothers and other such wealthy donors like that has to do with public opinion as well as political opinion on whether or not the Keystone XL pipeline is going to be approved?
Not to mention you have international interests as well. You have to deal with the ramifications that you have these large corporations. You have oil is sold on the World Stock Exchange. We practically have a Wall Street government. We have approximately 5 lobbyists to 1 congressman. You're always going to have issues until you treat paid lobbying as an act of treason. The American people have no voice. That's basically it.
Well, also, if I can jump in, also the oil companies and the folks that are oil services companies, anybody who is set to benefit from if the XL pipeline gets approved, they're all able to actually lobby agencies and departments as well. They don't just lobby Congress. They also get to have meetings with, the head of the Interior Department. They also meet with BLM. They meet with the EPA. They meet with the White House, and you know, there's considerable influence and attempts to influence these final decisions as they go through. Like, for instance, on Friday, late on Friday, the EPA issued a statement that they're going to delay the emissions, the new rules for new coal-fired power plants. You know, they're required by law through the Clean Air Act and a couple of lawsuits and a settlement that they had to come to, a consent decree that they came to, where it was made clear that the EPA is going to be required to do all of these emissions for power plants, new and old. They started to issue last year. They issued draft rules for new power plants, coal-fired power plants, and they were going to finalize those after a public comment period. But on Friday they said, well, we're going to put off that finalizing of the standards for the new power plants, and that's because they got a lot of input, as they put it, from lobbyists and from the industries that are going to be regulated. So they said, well, we'll go back and try to revise these because there's a concern that they'll be tied up in court for years, if not decade or more. So they're trying to revise them to make them more lawsuit-proof. So when you know that, you know, this lobbying is happening on all sides for anybody who has anything to do with making this thing either go forward or not go forward, the push is on.
And the push is absolutely immense.
Yes.
And so you bring up some great, excellent points. That's an excellent answer. Ree, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't actually. Not at this time.
Well, I think part of it is you know, telling people, like Rhiannon, when you talk about how you are talking with the folks that you meet in your everyday life and they think you're crazy, but you have at least informed them that there are other facts that they might not be aware of, you know, that they might not understand, that, hey, you should go check out this over here. You should understand that, you know, that what they said on Fox News, you know, is not actually the whole truth. I find that, you know, if you remind them that there are other aspects of this that they might not be hearing about, such as, you know, the crazy way that the TransCanada people decided to calculate how many jobs were going to be created. You know, I don't know if you heard about that, but they said, you know, 20,000 jobs. What they were actually talking about were job hours, which meant that sometimes one person doing one job could be counted as two different jobs. It was just a really crazy way to try to calculate this, and if most people understood that, they'd be like, oh, really? That's kind of crazy, because it's misleading, and it's, I think, purposely misleading.
Well, absolutely, it's absolutely purposeful, and it's meant to get those people who are only casually glancing at the news, so to speak, and catch them with interestingly worded statistics and pseudo facts that aren't actually facts, things that are the most important thing is education. And I think Cenk is absolutely right that everything does go back to money in politics, because as long as there is money in politics, it's not the will of the people, it's not the health of the people, it's not the benefit of the people that is going to be the first consideration of our elected officials. It's always going to be, what do the corporations want? What are the people that are paying for our campaigns? What do they want? What's important to them? And that's not how our country is supposed to be run. At this point, it's not a democracy. It's more of a corporate oligarchy. And I think the two most important things that we can focus on is educating our people, and making sure that we somehow manage to get money out of politics.
In order to educate the people, of course, we have to have a media that is responsible. And I'm going to touch on how the media has been treated in Arkansas in the next segment. But media, the regular media has been kept out of the loop. They don't know what's going on, or they're paid not to know what's going on. They're paid to.
Well, I would, you know, having worked in local media and in other in actual news, you know, most of the people there are genuine and they're doing the best that they can, and they're not told what they can and cannot say. They usually try to work with authorities on the scene and sometimes you're kept away from stuff because they're not letting the press in. But Lisa Song for Inside Climate News, bookmark insideclimatenews.com. She is actually down there on the ground. She and Chris Tackett of treehugger.com are both in Arkansas, and they're both covering what they're able to get. Lisa Song of Inside Climate News, she was threatened with arrest last week for trying to go in and get more information at the command center. They have a no-fly zone that's 1,000 feet up that Exxon, for some reason, is running and not the FAA. There's some question about the timing of how everything is working. But the good news, I think there is good news out of this Arkansas tar sands pipeline spill. It has brought it to everyone's attention. Exxon could not have helped the Keystone blockade people more if it had intentionally done anything else other than not paid attention to its pipeline, its 60-year-old pipeline, so that it burst, so that people could have an example right in front of them of how difficult this stuff is to clean up, how little the oil companies really do follow through on their responsibility to maintain their pipelines. I think that this has been sort of a very useful, if unfortunate, example of what we're looking at with these tar sands and pipelines bringing them across. There is an issue, though, that they're still going to try to exploit the tar sands in Alberta as much as possible. So if the XL pipeline doesn't go through, there's still the original Keystone pipeline that is already shipping tar sands. There are also railroad cars that are being used to ship tar sands. When they don't have, if they've got excess and they don't have the pipeline capacity, then they're going to ship them via rail. And there was a railroad derailment or train car derailment a couple of weeks ago. I think it was up in Minnesota. That was also of tar sands. But luckily, because it was just a train, it was a much smaller amount of oil that spilled. So I think that the oil companies are essentially not doing themselves any favors from their lax maintenance procedures that they've been using. So these can be helpful, these can be used and to remind people of what we're actually talking about.
All right, excellent. Okay, so we're running out of time for this segment, so I want to jump into final thoughts. And Desi, you're on a roll, so I'm going to let you get the first final thoughts.
Okay, my final thought on this is that it's really important, again, to talk to everyone you know, to talk to all the people in your circle, all of the folks that you know, and make sure that they understand, that they're up to date, on all of the facts of what we're talking about here. The local, the regional, the national impacts, the impacts on the folks that live along the way, pointing out the Arkansas pipeline spill as an immediate example of how any pipeline is going to spill. It's just a matter of time. So even though TransCanada will say, oh, it's a new pipeline, well, it's not going to spill for at least a year. That's not going to be, if they hear only one side, then they're only going to understand one side. So we have to help them understand that there's much more to this, and that this is something that, it's not the only pipeline being built, but it is the biggest one that we can point to, and we can say, look, see, there's the problem. That's what we can fight against and help people understand what the stakes are that we're talking about. One more thing. Public comment period on the Keystone XL pipeline is still going. There's about 10 days left. So if you have not made a public comment yet, just I think Sierra Club and the NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, are all running places where you can sign up, and they have like a form that you can fill out that helps get you started on establishing your public comment on the Keystone XL pipeline. The State Department has said that it's going to not publicize all of the comments. We'll find it. We'll see if they actually do that or not, because they're getting quite a bit of pushback as to why they're trying to keep the public comments quiet and not publish them, because often they will, and most agencies do. But we'll see. But now you have about 10 days or less to make your public comment heard, and that is counted, and that has to be taken into account. And absolutely that the oil companies and anyone who stands to profit from the Keystone XL pipeline is making sure that their people are making public comments. I hope that's
excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. And it'll probably spill 12 times in 1 year.
I hope not.
I hope not either. Daniel, let's go with your final thoughts on this one.
Do we have to remind the American people about the Transocean Deepwater Horizon spill? I mean, come on. No, the American public, you have to basically show the American people the facts. And right now we have more than 3 sets of facts when really there's only one set of facts. The best you can do is inform your friends, your family, your people in your community, people national, international, via the free medium of the internet, Twitter, social media, etc. Facebook, and etc. Google Plus, we got to plug them. We're using their product. That we're never going to get off our dependence on domestic and foreign oil if we keep building establishments and pillars for the oil companies. I mean, until you educate the American people, you're going to have to deal with the ignorance and the disinformation.
All right, Ree, final thoughts.
Well, like I said before, the most important thing we can do is focus on education, and it starts with our children, of course. When I was a kid, I remember doing, Earth Day, Do Not Pollute, poster contests, things like that, and now we've got, corporations that oil companies hosting Earth Day and
oh yeah,
the poster thing. Yes, what has coal, oil, and gas? What have they done for our country? Teaching kids to worship gas, oil, and coal, and that's what we have now. That's what we have to fight against. Making sure that our children aren't indoctrinated to believe this crap. And making sure that adults are educated. Everyone should have a good education in this country. I am so for education in this country. Good, well-rounded education, not just going through the motions so that you can come out at the other end with a job. This is, so people can be thoughtful, critical, well-developed members of society. So the best thing you can do if you're not a teacher is to use social media, like Daniel said, like Desi said, to get your voice out there, to get the word out there. Try not to argue with people too much. Try not to use too much profanity. I'm very guilty of that. I've been guilty of that. I get riled up, but that's not how you're going to change minds. There are some minds that you're not going to change, thus you shouldn't be arguing with them in the first place because they're just wasting your time. But there are some people out there that if you keep a cool head and you just give them the facts, that they might actually go, I never thought of it like that, or I didn't know that before. So, reach out to your apathetic friends. I've had to do that with a couple of people that I've really cared about but seem to be in their own bubble of, well, it doesn't really affect me. That bubble needs to be burst because people still have this disconnect. Well, it doesn't affect me. What does this have to do with my life? And that's exactly what Desi said in the bright side of the Arizona spill, is that it was in someone's backyard, literally. You couldn't ignore it. It's all over the news. There are so many spills and environmental catastrophes that don't end up on the news, that don't end up in the front headlines, but they're still disastrous. And Pensacola, Florida is still suffering from the Gulf oil spill several years ago. We can't forget about that. We're still suffering from, these environmental mishaps. And so, education is the most important thing. Reach out to people. Don't just keep the information to yourself. Let the world know what's going on out there. Make it so that it can't be ignored anymore.
And so my final thoughts, we have a problem in America that is threefold. We have a problem with our media, we have a problem with our education, and of course we have money in politics. And until we start to address those problems, we're going to have issues like Keystone XL be dictated by corporate interests. Those corporate interests are going to be rolling over the voices of regular people. Now, addressing what Desi had said about being able to make your public comments, it's a very important thing that your representatives know where you stand on the issues. Without your voice, another voice steps in for the other side.
What's
so
that?
Thank you. So you have to make sure to make your voice heard. And you may not think that it counts, but it really does. It counts more than you think, especially when you talk to your local state legislatures. You know, Congress is the one that is bought and sold. So you have to make sure to talk to your local state and representatives.
As well,
That
yes.
said, Keystone XL pipeline, I do see, I agree with the panel that it will be built, unfortunately, and there's really, I have the hope, and I hold out the hope that we are going to begin to invest in alternative energy. China is already leading the way, and they are heavily subsidizing their industry. Now, perhaps we should do the same thing. Instead of subsidizing oil companies to the tunes of billions of dollars a year, we should invest in our solar and wind and not believe in the corporate media and the corporate lies that you see on your TV on a daily basis. So with that said, I just want to agree with everybody that education is the most important thing. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, make sure that you are educated on this topic so that you can make the right decision. And those are my final thoughts. I want to thank you guys for watching this segment of TYT Community. I really want to thank our guests, Desi Doyen from the Green News Report. Desi, I want to know where our audience can find you.
Oh, well, you can find me on Twitter at Green News Report, which I think if I did it right, it should be at the bottom of my Chiron thingy. And then you can also find all of our Green News Reports at bradblog.com, or you can go direct to the main page for Green News Report, which is greennews.bradblog.com.
Excellent. Daniel, where can we find you, sir?
At Perfectly Epic at the text on the bottom of the screen.
Rhea, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter, blogspot.com, YouTube, and Facebook, all at Lady Rhiannon 824.
All right, and you can follow me on Twitter at Jeff's Politics, and you can also go to my YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/JCWaldorf, and you could follow this show on Twitter at TYT Community, and you can subscribe to our channel. We really appreciate it at youtube.com/TYT Community. And I want to thank you guys again for watching. I want to thank Desi Doyen for joining us today, and I just want to say, get out there and learn as much as you can. Thank you, guys.